Hi, let's talk about how to identify intervals. Here is an ascending C major scale, and each degree of the scale is measured as a vertical interval above the tonic note. So at the beginning, we have a C to a C, that's a unison, and the way we read this is as a perfect unison. Then we have C up to D. D is the second degree of the scale, and so the number of the interval is a second, and it's a major second because it's part of a major scale. Then we get a major third from C up to E, a perfect fourth, perfect fifth, major sixth, major seventh, and a perfect octave. Notice that when we're measuring the notes within the major scale, every interval is going to be either perfect or major. Here's a little chart of them. The perfect intervals are the unison, the fourth, the fifth, and the octave. The major intervals are the second, the third, sixth, and seventh. We can use this information to determine the number and the quality of intervals where the upper note does not fit into the major scale as well. And for that, this is a very important little chart that we have over here. A major interval, when it's stretched by half a step, becomes augmented. Major interval, when it's squashed or compressed by half a step, becomes minor. Minor interval, when it's squashed by half a step, becomes diminished. A perfect interval stretched by half a step becomes augmented. Perfect interval reduced by half a step becomes diminished. It doesn't go to minor and then to diminished as we compress it by half steps the way the major interval does. So let's put that into practice. Here we have an interval of a fifth from an F to C. We can count that by counting spaces and lines, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we recognize that as a fifth. Then to determine the quality of the interval, we think in the key of the bottom note. And we're interested in whether C is in the key of F, whether there's a C in the F major scale. There is. So we know that we're going to be able to use this pattern of perfect and major intervals to determine the quality of this. Therefore, we assign a quality of perfect to this fifth because we know the upper note is in the key of the lower note. So now we've got a perfect fifth labeled from F up to C. The next interval is F to C sharp, and we can see that the perfect interval has been stretched by half a step. When we raise the upper note of an interval by half a step, the interval gets bigger. We can think of this as a floor and a ceiling, and we're increasing the amount of space between them. So look at our chart here. What happens to a perfect interval when it's stretched by half a step? It becomes augmented. So it's still a fifth because it's an F and a C, but now it's augmented. We use the same kind of logic, determining that this is a diminished fifth. First we look at the F and the C to get the number. An F to a C is always a fifth, regardless of the quality. It could be augmented, could be perfect. But in this case, we see that there's a flat lowering the upper note by half a step, so the interval's half a step smaller. The space between these two notes has been compressed by half a step, so the perfect interval becomes diminished. Let's look at what happens to a major interval. Here's a third from A to C. The interval from A to C is always going to be a third. The accidentals will determine whether it's major, minor, augmented, or diminished, but nevertheless, it's got to be a third if it's from A to C. We can see that graphically, visually, a space to a space is a third. And to determine the quality of that third, we think in the key of A. So is C sharp in the A major scale? Yes, it is. It's the third degree. So this is a major third. Then we start altering the top note. If we bring it down a half a step, this third becomes minor. If we go back to the major third and raise the C sharp half a step, we can only raise the C sharp half a step by making it a double sharp. if we were to raise the C sharp by half a step by making it a D, this wouldn't be a third anymore. We want to keep this in the number of the third. So we double sharp the C sharp. That raises it half a step and gives us an augmented third for this interval. Okay, now we've got a C with a flat on it. So this interval, A to C flat, is half a step less than the minor third that we've already labeled correctly over here. So now we can look at our chart and see, well, what happens to a minor interval when we compress it by half a step? Well, here it is, minor interval becomes diminished. So this is a diminished third. Here we do something a little different than we've done before. We're going to alter the bottom note of an interval, but still, we'll use the same reasoning. Here's a major third from A to C sharp. If we flat the bottom note, does the interval get bigger or smaller? The interval actually gets bigger because we've lowered the bottom note, making the space larger between the bottom and the upper note. We've lowered the floor while the ceiling stays the same. So what happens when a major third gets bigger by half a step? It becomes augmented. So this interval is an augmented third. So that's the kind of thinking we need to use to work on our first interval homework assignment. So let's get that paper and have a look at the first few exercises. Practice 2, intervals. Identify each interval by number and quality. Let me give you a method here. There's a space where I can actually write a method in. 1, count the number. Count the number. You always do that first, and it's very straightforward. Regardless of the accidentals, you can count the number of the interval. So G to D is a fifth. You'll get so you can recognize that very quickly. But to count it, we count with a 1 where the lower note is. So that line is 1. Next space is 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's a fifth. Number 2, think in the key of the bottom note. So we're going to think in the key of G. So you know where this is headed. If we decide that the D natural is in the G major scale, then this is a perfect fifth. Well, the key signature of G major only has 1 sharp in it, F sharp, so we know all the other notes are natural, hence there's a D in the G major scale, so this is a perfect fifth. Fine. Next interval. From a space to the very next line is a second. A to B is always going to be a second, so we can put a 2 there. What's the lower note of these two? A, so we're going to think in the key of A major. So is B in the A major scale? Yeah, we can easily confirm that. That's the second degree of the A major scale. So this interval is major. It's a major second. Same kind of thinking here. If we count the lines and spaces, we'll see that this is a seventh from E flat to D. Is D a note in the E flat major scale? Yeah, it is. It's the leading tone, actually. And since we know all intervals in the major scale are going to be either perfect or major, this is a major seventh. And that should be enough to get you started. Let's do one that comes out a little differently over here. F to E, that's a seventh. Is E flat in the F major scale? No. The 7th degree of the F major scale is E natural. So we can do a little scratch work here. We'll remind ourselves that that's the note that we would find as the 7th degree of the scale. And we see that this note is a half a step lower. So we just go back to our chart from right here and use that to find out what happens to the quality of the interval when a major 7th is reduced by half a step, and you'll put that quality here. Okay, hard intervals. we need some tricks for working on these. We did a little of this in class, and we can catch up on this now. So the first one, this looks a lot like number 1 in the previous exercise, but there are sharps on it. Let's get the number down first. We're going to identify the interval G to D, whether it's G sharp and D sharp or G flat and D flat, it's always a fifth. G to D is a fifth. Now to determine this quality, the trick that I like to use is to say, well, an interval is simply a distance between two notes. So if we raise both notes by the same amount, the interval between them stays the same. If we lower both notes by the same amount, the distance between them stays the same. So here they're both raised by a half step because of the sharps. So we just cover up the sharps, and we see the G to D. We've already identified that up there. We know that's a perfect fifth. So it's still a perfect fifth, even if we sharp both notes, because what we're interested in is the distance between them. Perfect fifth. How about E to C? What is that number? That is a sixth. And we can use the same trick here. Let's cover up the two sharps, because E sharp to C sharp is going to be the same interval as just plain E natural to C natural. So if we can identify that, then we have our answer. Why don't we want to deal with this interval as it's written? Well, this is what I call a really ugly bottom note. You know how here in our method we had think in the key of the bottom note. We don't want to think in the key of E sharp, because that would just have too many sharps and double sharps trying to construct that scale. So things get a lot easier if we just go over here, do a little scratch work, and we'll do E natural to C natural. Okay, so to do this one, now we can think in the key of the bottom note. E major has 4 sharps, and we expect the 6th degree of the scale to be a C sharp. It's not, it's a half step too low. So E natural to C natural is a minor 6th. Therefore, if we raise both notes by putting a sharp on each of them, we still have a minor 6th. Okay, we can do the same trick here. I'll leave that to you. Let's do number 4, where I have a little bit different trick. Once again, we have a bottom note that I call an ugly note, because we don't want to try to think in the key of F flat. That key would have 8 flats in it, counting a double flat on B. So we don't want to think in the key of F flat. So let's do a little scratch work here. We're going to take that flat away and see what happens if we just identify the interval from F to C. Both of these notes are natural. Well, we've talked about that before already in this session. So we know that's a perfect fifth. F to C is a perfect fifth. So if we lower the bottom note by putting a flat on it, lowered by a half a step, that perfect fourth is going to become an augmented fourth. So that's the answer there, augmented fourth. We've recently talked about number 6 in class. The tricks that we've talked about here will work to do the rest of these. Okay, now to construct an interval by adding an upper note. Let's go back to the method here. I realize I didn't really finish this for you. For identifying the interval, count the number, think in the key of the bottom note, and then the third step is compare the interval to the note in the key, and 4, name it. That's what we did here, for example. We thought in the key of the bottom note, and we compared the E flat to the note that's actually in the key of F, the E natural, and used that knowledge to name this interval. Okay, let's move down here and we're going to construct an interval by adding an upper note. So we'll use something very similar to our method that we used for identifying an interval. Count the number first and put the upper note in. Then think in the key of the bottom note and supply accidentals that will give us the quality we want. So in the first exercise here, we have an A flat and we want to construct a major third above it. So count the number first. Make sure we get a note that's a third above the A flat. So C is a third above A. The quality of notes aside, an A to a C is always a third, whether it's an A flat to a C natural, A flat to C sharp, it's always going to be some kind of third. So that's done. We're confident of that. We have a third. Now, think in the key of the bottom note. Does the A flat major scale have a C in it? Yeah, it does. The C is the third degree of the A flat major scale, so we know that third is major, and this is correct. So we'll put a little check mark by that. All we had to do was draw the C in there. The next one, first thing we do is count the number and put a note that's a fourth above F. So we'll put a B there. So we've got a note here that's a fourth above the F, but is it the right accidental? Is this a perfect fourth? Well, what kind of B do we expect in the F major scale? The key signature of F major has one flat, and it's B flat, so we know that we actually have to put a flat here to get the note that is in the F major scale and gives us the perfect fourth we want. Okay, so that one's done. Major seventh. Okay, we count our lines and spaces. We know that a seventh above E is some kind of D. Now we just need the quality. Is D in the E major scale? No, the E major scale has 4 sharps and D sharp is the leading tone in E major. So to get that note, to get our major seventh, we have to put a sharp on it. So that's how you do these. All of these should work out fairly well. Here we have to go into bass clef. The last exercise on the page is simply doing this across 2 clefs. Let's look at the first one just to get you started. From A up to G. The number can be a little trickier when we're looking across a staff like this. We want to be able to count lines and spaces. Let's move the A up to the treble clef here. So that's the same pitch and the same register. Now we can look at that a little more easily and see that this is a seventh. Then we'll think in the key of A major as we've done before. We see that the G natural there doesn't fit into the A major scale. It's a half step too low. It's not the leading tone, G sharp. It's G natural. So this is a minor seventh